Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Breath of Fire on the Super Nintendo. The first Breath of Fire's story isn't anything amazing. There's nothing really groundbreaking in here, a lot of the tropes have been done. It's still pretty good the way it is, you're just not going to see anything too crazy in it, especially with the first entry. As the series goes on, then yes, the plots get more complex, and there's some more twists to them. And honestly, they get a lot better. This first one is good for what it was. You play as the chosen hero of the Light Dragon clan, and your enemies are the Dark Dragons. Seems pretty straightforward. The Dark Dragons are trying to bring Tyr back to the world, and you're trying to stop them. There are a bunch of goddess keys that you need to go around and collect, and at first, it's nothing really special because you're kind of just fighting these generic generals of the Dark Dragon army. Things do pick up quite a bit once you get past that. There will be like a little cutscene, and then you're sort of introduced to the four real big bad people of the game. It's kind of interesting how a lot of JRPGs do that. There are usually like four things you need to collect. There are four big bad people that you need to beat, that kind of thing. And that sort of happens here. There is a bit of a twist to it, but nothing, again, that's really crazy. While the story is pretty basic, to be honest, it does pick up quite a bit near the end of it. Probably about 2/3 of the way through. It gets pretty good, where you have a lot of somewhat emotional scenes going on, or as emotional as a 16-bit game can be. You meet some people who have friends that they've turned against, or some of the generals have better backstories. They actually have personalities and names. They're real characters that exist in this game, as opposed to just the generic general that you have to face. I really enjoyed a lot of these characters. They were pretty cool, even if they were sometimes just evil for evil's sake, which happens. Some of them have, a little bit more going on. Like Cyril here, she's pretty interesting. For her short time on the screen, she's pretty interesting. Then after you go up, you face Zog, who is at first presented as the big bad guy of this whole thing. You defeat him, and then you find out that there's another bad person that you have to face, who is actually pulling some strings to kind of gain power for themselves. It's a nice little twist. It does kind of feel like they just wanted to keep the game going for a few more hours. That happens every once in a while in RPGs, where, hey, I beat the Emperor, I should be all set, and then the game goes, let's just keep this going for a little bit. That happens here, but it's still pretty good. After that little twist, where kind of your mentor from the beginning of the game, the person who's protecting you, is mind-controlled and turns against you, then you have to go and face Tyr eventually. It's a pretty fun fight and everything like that. The road to get to her is a little frustrating at times, but overall it's really exciting. I like this game. I like some of the plot elements to it. There were others that I was just sort of like, okay, can we get this over with so I can get to something a little bit better? But overall, the story is pretty good for what it is. The gameplay for the first Breath of Fire, and honestly for the rest of the series, is kind of your typical JRPG type of battle. You're really just doing turn-based combat, you're picking your character's moves and everything like that, deciding whether you want them to fight, defend, use spells, items, that sort of thing. It's not too crazy, which you wouldn't expect it to get really crazy at this point, especially in the early 90s. Now, there is a little bit of a twist. There's something that Breath of Fire kind of brings to the table that's a little bit different. Much like how Final Fantasy would introduce like summoning spells and that kind of thing, Breath of Fire allows you to kind of change your character. So you can transform into, your main character can transform into a dragon. You get another character who can change his form and do a bunch of different weird stuff. Just other monsters and everything like that. You have two characters who can change their form when they're on the main map scene, so you can kind of move around better. One turns into a fish, the other one turns into a bird, and they're both pretty useful for what they are. So that's kind of an interesting thing that Breath of Fire brings to it. This first one, though, the transformations are done in a way that is a bit of a detriment to like spells and other abilities like that. And I'll talk about that a little bit later with some of my frustrations on that. But I think the transformations kind of did a little bit to help Breath of Fire stand out in some ways. They can be incredibly powerful, or in some cases they can be kind of confusing as to how they really work. And that would have been better explained if I had the manual, which I don't for this. Like pretty much every RPG from this era, you have to kind of grind to get levels. So the more monsters you defeat, the more experience you get. That experience adds up, you gain levels, and in some cases you gain new abilities. In other cases, it's kind of weird how it works. Instead of having every character kind of gain levels at roughly the same pace, it feels like some characters will level up faster than others in this. So you have a character like Blue, it felt like she was gaining levels a lot faster than my main character, or the Chosen One, the guy that turns into dragons. And that felt strange to me. It kind of made, the whole grinding for levels thing a little weird at times. I never felt like I had to grind for levels. I was doing pretty good just going through it and not really spending time wandering around aimlessly, at least not on purpose. By default, I had to wander around because some of this stuff is a little bit cryptic, but overall it didn't feel like I had to spend hours trying to gain levels to do anything. I also liked how your magic users will gain spells as they go along. So the more they get leveled up, the more spells they learn, the better spells that they learn, and that sort of thing. So that was kind of a nice thing to see. It's kind of a surprise when you play some of the more modern games where that's not the way it works, and then you go back to a retro game and you're like, oh, this is fun. I remember doing this. I don't have to waste a whole bunch of money buying spells, or I don't just have to, cross my fingers that I'll find them along the way. Most of the characters in this have like a secondary function that they can do when you're just kind of walking around on the overworld map or in the dungeons. And that was kind of awesome to see. So, like I mentioned, two of your characters can turn into kind of like transports, which is pretty great. And then you have another character who can knock down walls, one who can disarm traps and unlock doors, and another one that can kind of walk through the forests, and one that can dig for different items. So it's kind of fun that they threw that in there, and I think it's really well done. That's pretty much it for the gameplay. Aside from all of that fun stuff that I mentioned, it's kind of a standard RPG or a JRPG, whatever that genre actually means. And yeah, the gameplay is really solid in this, and I really enjoyed it. I was really digging the graphics in this game. I really love pixel art, and this game has just wonderful pixel art in it. They use kind of a mixture of both cutscenes and sort of like still frame images, as well as like in-game cutscenes. So all of those work together to make something that's pretty cool. Particularly with the stone robot part here that we're seeing now. I loved the way that this was done. where they combined all of those different things, where you have sort of these different cutscenes where you see the robot climbing up, throwing itself into the volcano. You have the robot firing its laser. It's really well done, and then it'll cut back to like the in-game graphics, and it all kind of feels like it fits together. It's really great the way they do this. The monsters and the bosses all look really good as well. They feel pretty unique to the game. There are probably one or two that feel like they came from another game, particularly when you fight like the slimes and whatnot. They feel like they could have been in like a Dragon Quest game or even in a Final Fantasy game. But the rest feel kind of unique to this game in particular. You'll see like Breath of Fire reuse some of these, and it really works well to sort of tie everything in the series together. I thought the bosses were pretty well detailed. When you change into your different dragon forms, especially the ultimate form, which we'll see in a minute, I think it looks pretty great. Like the transformation scenes are pretty awesome. The different spells that you use, they all look like what they're supposed to. So if you cast ice or fire or lightning, it all kind of looks that way. Overall, just the look of the game is really wonderful. I was loving playing this game. It's just a really, really fun game to look at. So yeah, I felt like the spells and the abilities were kind of out of balance here. I really only had 2 spellcasters that did anything, and that was Nina and Blue. And I'm guessing it's probably designed that way. The healing spells were great. The buffing spells were pretty good as well. But the combat spells, those just felt off to me in some ways. I didn't feel like I was really getting the amount of like attack that was warranted of the mana of the magic point cost. It just sort of felt odd, and most of the time I just thought maybe I should be using regular attacks. And for most of the game, that's kind of what I got by on, were just sort of the regular attacks. Even when Ryu turns into a dragon and everything, he's really just using his regular attacks. I do want to say the dragon powers were really awesome, the way that you go about getting them, where Ryu has to like go on little mini quests to go get them, where you'll find a shrine, he'll go inside, talk to a guy, and then he'll get new dragon powers after fighting a boss. That was done really well. So really the attack spells were kind of like my biggest dislike of this entire thing. Aside from that, everything else with the game was really well done. I thought the story, it got a lot better as the game went on, like a lot better at the end. It was kind of paint by numbers at the beginning, but at the end they sort of did a few things that were nice to see. There were only a few fights that I was like, this is really ridiculous. And there were only a few times where I wasn't exactly sure what the game expected me to do. And there were other moments where I kind of wanted a map that like actually mattered, because they do give you a map in the game, but it's not labeled at all, which I guess I can understand why the in-game map isn't labeled. So I can't really complain about it too much. It does sort of, how can I put this? Like a lot of our other RPGs, it sort of assumes that you've memorized where all of these different towns are and you can pinpoint them on a map. That's not always the case, especially with, at least for me, it's not, where you maybe visit a town once at the beginning of the game, and then the game assumes that you have made a connection with that game, with that town being that name, and then being able to return to it later on in the game. It also didn't help that I played this over the span of a month, so I took kind of days off in between. So that probably screwed me over as well. I think only one boss fight I found pretty infuriating. And oh my gosh, wow. I found really just, it made me angry a little bit. And that's because I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. And you're supposed to fight it and then run away. and that just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think it was like the Mothra fight. I do have a clip of it at some point. I'll show it, I think. We'll see. Anyway, you keep hitting this thing, and all of your attacks miss, no matter what you do. And the stupid moth thing's attacks also miss. This is when you go into your little mole guy's dream to kind of snap him out of what's going on. And it's just really goddamn annoying. That was part of the game that I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. Eventually got through it and everything, but man, was it annoying as all hell. There were some times where I found myself just sort of flying around looking for stuff, because I'm supposed to go to like different dragon shrines and whatnot, or I'm trying to find like all of my guy's dragon armor and his dragon powers and everything, and that got a little frustrating trying to find everything. Eventually you can find it all, and thankfully there are some pretty good guides for this game now. Back in the day, I could see myself just wandering around aimlessly trying to find this crap, and yeah, they're not really fetch quests because you're actually using the items, and normally they're a lot stronger than anything you have, so yeah, at times it just kind of feels like, okay, you're expected to stumble across this, or you need to find somebody in the town, and that person can be just really confusing as to where to find. Overall, though, I have way more likes than dislikes for this, even if it does sound a little negative. So this is a series that I really like. I do enjoy the Breath of Fire series quite a bit. The third game is really my favorite because that was the first one that I played, and honestly, it was the first PlayStation game that I owned, so I have a lot more nostalgia tied up with that one. Going back and playing the first one again, and giving it like a much better shot than what I did the first time, it was a lot of fun to go back and actually look at all this stuff and see where everything I liked about the third game kind of came from. There really wasn't anything that I thought was awful in this game. I thought even the things that I didn't necessarily like, it wasn't because the game was doing it to me. It was because I had missed something and I couldn't go back, or I had to go back and find it. And if I had just sort of paid more attention, I would have been fine. I think the first Breath of Fire is one of the best. It's one of the better RPGs on the Super Nintendo. And even though there are some that I like more, I still like Phantasy Star 4 more. I like both Final Fantasy 4 and 6 more than this, and that's kind of it for the 16-bit RPGs that I really like. Oh, and Chrono Trigger I like more than this. But this one was really a lot of fun to actually go and see where this series began and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.